Because right now there's more dwarves on this podcast than there are in the new Snow White movie. And that's probably due to Peter Dinklage.
Yeah, they're remaking the movie. They just got rid of the dwarves. Okay,
but what do they call them?
Why would they get rid of the dwarves, though?
Magical creatures.
Peter Dinklage comes into this as when Rachel Zegler was cast. He laughed at Disney, saying it's fake progressivism.
Literally no offense to anything. They're very proud to cast a Latino actress as Snow White. Makes no sense to me. You're progressive in one way, but you're still making that backward story of 7 dwarves living in a cave. What the are you doing, man?
Welcome back to Celebrity. It's Olivia here. It should have been magical. Disney, armed with a $200 million budget and a mission to modernize its very first princess, announced the live-action Snow White remake with bold ambition. They called it Progress, a new vision, a celebration of diversity, womanhood, and fairy tales through a 2025 lens. And for a hot second, the internet buzzed with cautious optimism. Rachel Zegler, a rising star fresh off West Side Story, was cast in the lead, a Latina Snow White. Bold? Yes. Controversial? Absolutely. But Disney believed they could weather the storm.
What they didn't see coming, what no one did, was that the greatest threat to this film's survival wasn't a poison apple. It was a microphone. Enter Peter Dinklage, the Emmy-winning Game of Thrones icon. In a now infamous interview, Dinklage torched Disney's vision.
Before we peel back the layers of this wild unraveling, make sure to smash that like button and hit subscribe. If you love deep dives with no fluff, just facts, receipts, and a sprinkle of chaos, you're in the right place. And trust me, you won't believe how this one plays out.
Not because of Zegler's casting, but because the studio was still making a movie about 7 dwarfs living in a cave. He called it fake progressivism, a feel-good band-aid that missed the bigger picture. The internet caught fire, Disney panicked, and suddenly, a story about magic, love, and innocence became a minefield of cultural landmines. Rewrites were ordered, characters erased, the dwarfs were rebranded as magical bandits. Zegler, already under a harsh spotlight, now found herself at the center of a script that kept shifting like sand beneath her feet.
The argument should have been from Peter Dinklage, there's power of being on TV, there's power of television, and to put 7 people with dwarfism on camera in a major Disney movie, there's still power there. If the story is offensive, change the story, don't change the characters.
Behind the scenes, insiders whispered of growing tension, and then the rumor dropped. Rachel Zegler, privately and quietly, was blaming Peter Dinklage. When you're cast as the face of Disney's most iconic fairy tale, every word, every expression, every misstep becomes magnified. And for Rachel Zegler, the pressure had reached boiling point. The whispers grew louder. According to insiders close to the production, Zegler was growing frustrated, not just with the backlash, but with the reason for the backlash. Behind closed doors, she allegedly confided that her performance was sabotaged before it ever had a chance to breathe. The cause? Peter Dinklage's public condemnation of the 7 dwarfs, what he viewed as a regressive stereotype. From Zegler's point of view, that single interview may have been the domino that sent the entire production into chaos.
Said it's now being reported they won't be little people and will be called the 7 Bandits instead, which has fans outraged. The $200 million budget, this is likely going to fail and cost Disney $100 million. With that, I'm Charles Pearl. Subscribe to learn something.
After all, Disney had already committed to a story. They had designs, scripts, direction. But when Dinklage's comments exploded across headlines, the studio spiraled into full damage control mode. The dwarfs were removed, reimagined, or replaced with CGI placeholders. Script pages were reportedly rewritten on the fly. New characters were shoehorned in to fill the void. And Zegler? She was stuck performing in a story that no longer made sense. Worse still, she couldn't say a word about it publicly. Whether due to contract clauses or studio silence, Zegler remained outwardly cheerful, inwardly furious. The actress who once seemed to radiate confidence now found herself bearing the weight of a failing production, and the internet wasn't letting up. Fan forums turned vicious. Memes mocked her press interviews. Her every word was dissected, twisted, and weaponized.
We are now at a 1 out of 10 on IMDb for the new Snow White, and couldn't happen to a better person. What is the lesson to be learned here with this Snow White disaster?
Yeah, we had more dwarfs than we did viewers in most of these theaters. And as you know, there were no dwarfs other than some CGI weird generated version of them.
And through it all, the rumor persisted. Rachel Zegler blamed Peter Dinklage, not because he spoke up, but because Disney listened, because his criticism, however well-intended, led to a panicked overcorrection that wrecked the heart of the movie.
But here's the twist. Dinklage never responded, never commented, never confirmed or denied. His silence? Deafening. And now the stage was set for something even messier. Because when a $200 million film is about to collapse, someone always gets thrown under the bus. The red flags were impossible to miss. As production neared completion, the Snow White remake was no longer a bold reimagining. It was a Frankenstein's monster, stitched together from rewrites, studio panic, and increasingly desperate attempts to dodge controversy.
The reason being that Peter Dinklage, who does have achondroplasia, finds the depiction of the Seven Dwarfs very offensive. Peter Dinklage said that Disney casting Rachel Zegler is their way to feel good about themselves while ignoring a much bigger problem.
The fact that this film is completely falling apart, we're going to take a look at how bad this movie is actually doing in the box office, because it is hilariously bad. It is a complete and total humiliation for Disney, and like I said, they deserve it all, okay?
Early screenings leaked horror stories, disjointed scenes, clunky messaging, characters that felt like placeholders in a script with no clear soul. But the real gut punch? It wasn't the critics. It wasn't even the fans. It was the numbers. As test audiences delivered lukewarm to scathing reactions, studio insiders began bracing for impact. Disney, home of billion-dollar box office fairy tales, was about to suffer a catastrophic loss. Reports estimated a $100 million shortfall. That's not a flop. That's a disaster. And in the middle of the storm, Rachel Zegler, front and center, trying to hold it all together. The backlash against her intensified. Every time she posted online, it sparked more hate than hype. She became a lightning rod, not because of her performance, but because of everything surrounding it. Her critics weren't just moviegoers. They were cultural commentators, political voices, die-hard Disney fans who felt betrayed. And as the chaos unfolded, Disney executives scrambled.
Do these orgies of CGI animation, recycling in a loveless format, the exact same, now every story is the same story about, again, a kick-ass female protagonist. Like, what? It's just so formulaic and rote and done without any love or originality whatsoever. I think that's the problem.
You are in these kinds of roles. It is a privilege, and you actually have some contractual obligations that you're supposed to be doing no harm, and in fact, above doing no harm, adding value to elevating this artwork that you've put together with a whole army of people who, dedicate their lives to it. So I understand.
Rumors swirled of infighting within the creative team, writers clashing over tone, marketing teams begging for clarity, and producers wondering if there was any way to salvage what had once been a sure thing. Zegler was reportedly furious, not just at the studio, but at the environment she was now forced to survive in. She didn't just lose control of her character, she lost control of her narrative. According to leaks, she believed her portrayal had been undermined by the studio's erratic changes in response to Dinklage's interview. What was once supposed to be a heartfelt reimagining had become a jumbled lecture, wrapped in pixels and PR disasters. Dinklage, meanwhile, remained radio silent. And that silence? It echoed louder than any denial ever could. Because whether he meant to or not, his single critique had helped spark a chain reaction. And Rachel Zegler was now the face of the fallout. But this wasn't just about one actress or one movie anymore. This was about what happens when legacy meets activism. And no one agrees on the ending. By the time Snow White hit theaters, it didn't land. It crashed. Loudly, publicly, painfully. A $200 million cinematic gamble reduced to industry gossip and meme fodder. And as the numbers rolled in, reviews flatlining, theaters half empty, something darker was brewing behind the scenes. A quiet war between the stars. By now, the rumor mill wasn't just spinning. It was spinning with purpose. Whispers turned into headlines. Rachel Zegler and Peter Dinklage couldn't be in the same room. That's not hyperbole. Disney, reportedly in full crisis mode, scrapped plans for a formal premiere, citing scheduling issues. But insiders say the truth was far messier. Zegler was allegedly livid, forced into the spotlight for a movie she no longer recognized. Her performance, once full of promise, was buried beneath controversy and last-minute edits. And while she bore the brunt of the backlash, Dinklage was spared, protected by the shield of public respect and past achievements. Worse? He never clarified. never owned his role in what came after his critique went viral. To Zegler, this wasn't just frustrating. It felt like betrayal.
I really hope that I have a similar heart to hers. She has this beautiful, unending kindness and positive outlook towards the world and the world around us. I wish I could be as positive as she is at times. That's certainly a difference we have, but I think it's a very human thing to not always see the bright side. But that is part of the beauty of Snow White. It has been for 88 years now that she just sees the good in everyone and everything. And I hope that I and so many people who watch this film can embody that as well.
She hadn't rewritten the script. She hadn't made the creative decisions. She simply signed on to play a role in a story she believed had magic left in it. And instead, she was made into the villain. Some fans defended her, said she was scapegoated, caught between a studio in chaos and a cultural powder keg. Others weren't so kind. They labeled her arrogant, ungrateful, even toxic. One viral clip of her joking about not needing a prince became a symbol of everything wrong with woke Hollywood. And the internet doesn't forget. Meanwhile, Dinklage's silence grew strategic. No press, no statements, no apologies. He returned to other roles, other projects, untouched, clean, above it all. And the divide between them became permanent. No official feud, no confrontations on camera. But the premiere was canceled, appearances were cut, and Disney was left promoting a film without its leads standing side by side. A fairy tale had turned into a Cold War. And the kingdom? It was falling apart. There are stories so woven into the fabric of pop culture, you don't just retell them, you protect them. Snow White wasn't just Disney's first princess. She was the spark that ignited an empire, a symbol of innocence, magic, and cinematic history. So when Disney decided to reimagine her story for a modern age, expectations were stratospheric. What they delivered instead, a cautionary tale of hubris and cultural confusion. Gone were the dwarves, rebranded as magical creatures or bandits. The fairy tale romance, reduced to a footnote. The whimsy, the charm, the delicate balance of fantasy and fable, all sacrificed on the altar of social messaging. The result? A film that didn't enchant, it lectured.
As an actor, you don't get to dictate anything. You don't get to dictate if a film actually happens. You don't get to dictate when it is shot, how it is shot, if you can ever speak about it to the public. You are simply just there to show up and say your lines and look the way they want you to look.
Snow White is the first American feature-length animated movie, 1937. It's one of the most beloved movies of all time.
On the original production, I was scared of it. Oh, it was so weird. It was a stalker. Like, I feel like if you are taking on the most iconic Disney role ever, genuinely, like this was the most prolific Disney film, I feel like you should kind of have some sort of reverence for the original production.
One that tried so hard to appeal to everyone, it ended up appealing to no one. Fans were devastated. Critics were merciless. The media had a new buzzword, the Snow White disaster. The irony? It wasn't Peter Dinklage's criticism or Rachel Zegler's press gaffes that killed this film. It was the studio's reaction to both, their fear of backlash, their frantic attempts to appease every online voice, their decision to toss a century-old story into a blender and hope the pieces still felt like magic. They didn't. And once the story cracked, the backlash never stopped. Every interview Zegler gave became a flashpoint. Every social post a new firestorm. Meanwhile, Dinklage, who may have unknowingly lit the first match, was now seen as untouchable, above the fray. Disney, for its part, stayed quiet, silent, watching a beloved fairy tale sink under the weight of its own contradictions. It wasn't just a bad movie, it was a betrayal of trust. And as box office numbers stalled and fan excitement turned to apathy, one haunting truth settled in. Some legacies shouldn't be rewritten. Snow White wasn't just mishandled, she was lost. And the final act of this disaster, it would be decided not by Disney, not by the actors, but by the audience that Disney forgot to listen to. When the dust finally settled, it wasn't just a movie that had crashed. It was a reputation, a career, a studio's untouchable aura. Rachel Zegler, once hailed as Hollywood's golden girl, was now polarizing at best.
She was also just a spoiled, entitled, narcissistic brat who was perfectly willing, because she's not well, she might be stupid, but she's not so dumb that she didn't realize that by, for example, coming out and saying that all Trump supporters deserve to suffer for like, she's smart enough to know that, of course, that's going to upset a large portion of the potential audience for this project that I'm on.
And this started with the movie star Rachel Zegler, who I believe would be categorized as a loudmouth dope.
Radioactive at worst. With every new casting rumor, every social media post, her name sparked fresh debate. Fans were divided. Some still saw her as a victim of a broken system. Others called her the embodiment of everything wrong with modern Hollywood, entitled, tone-deaf, disconnected from the audiences she was meant to charm. But make no mistake, Zegler didn't crash Snow White alone. This was a demolition by committee, a script trying to please Twitter before pleasing children, a studio ignoring test audiences, a production team paralyzed by backlash, rewriting scenes mid-filming, tossing away heart in favor of hashtags. Yet in the court of public opinion, someone always pays. And Disney? They weren't about to take the hit themselves. So Zegler's appearances were quietly canceled, press tours restructured, red carpets vanished, and in the middle of it all, whispers of a full reboot began to swirl. New cast, new tone, new era. One name surged like wildfire, Jenna Ortega. The internet lit up. Fans imagined her as the anti-Zegler, subtle, sharp, emotionally grounded. Memes, edits, concept art. It was like a collective effort to erase what came before and start fresh. Disney never confirmed it, but they didn't have to. Silence is strategy. Meanwhile, Dinklage returned to work, untouched. He was never the villain, never even in the fight. And that silence, it protected him.
God forbid a woman dream about true love. We're all just sitting around here, maybe I could be president one day. I hate men, I just want to be president. That screams Disney princess. Oh my God, I'm literally getting enraged. Once again, I feel like I'm back in 2022.
And Disney has canceled all of Rachel Zegler's appearances on their media platforms. Kind of tough if you are the biggest media company on earth to have that company turn against you.
Disney, despite losing over $1 billion on their last 4 movies, as they continue to shove woke politics into people's faces who just want to go to the movie, laugh, cry, and go home. Look, people don't want to be lectured when they're watching a movie, and they certainly don't want to be told that they're bad people. But that's what Disney continues to do.
Zegler's camp, reportedly frustrated, saw that silence as cowardice. But they also knew this. Going public would only feed the fire. And Rachel? She was already burning. Now she's moving forward, signing on for new projects, smiling in interviews. But the shadow of Snow White looms behind her, a role that became a burden, a fairy tale turned cautionary tale. As for Disney, they're pretending it never happened, but audiences remember. And that brings us to the final chapter, where the blame ends, but the reckoning truly begins. It didn't end with credits. It didn't end with reviews. It didn't even end when Snow White quietly limped out of theaters and into Disney's streaming library like an injured animal no one wanted to talk about. This story never really ended, because what happened with Snow White wasn't just a Hollywood mishap, it was a cultural pulse check, and the results were chilling. The blame? It was everywhere. Rachel Zegler for her polarizing interviews, Peter Dinklage for a comment that sparked a domino effect, Disney for bowing to backlash instead of standing by vision. The studio didn't just fail to tell a story, they failed to choose which story to tell. Caught between nostalgia and modernism, between sensitivity and spectacle, they spun themselves into a fog of indecision.
And the audience? They saw right through. The Snow White remake became the ultimate where actors became targets, advocates became chaos, and billion-dollar were swallowed by internet dis and a script nobody believed.
And if you disagree with this sentiment, I don't need your business. Thanks.
You know what? Maybe Disney does. Maybe you're a tool, you're a pawn in this film. You didn't write it. You didn't direct it. You have nothing to do with the creation of Snow White. Right. You should shut up and do the job.
The thing that really shocks me about this story, Disney and all these media companies, they invest hundreds of millions of dollars into these projects, right? Have they ever thought about maybe like a little bit of vulnerability study, opposition research, that sort of thing before you go and hire some Zoomer who's a lunatic?
Whether Rachel Zegler ever truly blamed Peter Dinklage doesn't even matter anymore. The rumor stuck. It became myth, a symbol of deeper fractures. Because the real truth is this. It wasn't one actor's fault. It was all of them, and none of them. It was the studio, the press, the public, the timeline where fairy tales go to die, not to dream. Now, anytime Disney announces another remake, people look back at this one. They remember the collapse, the fake smiles, the missing premiere, the $200 million lesson in what happens when a studio loses its soul.
So now, as the movie comes out, the two biggest stars in this movie can't stand each other to the point where they can't be in the same room, which forced Disney, in their infinite wisdom, to cut back on doing a formal premiere.
Kind of a Disney magic that had depth, that had absolute, it was riveting. And it's based, of course, on a Brothers Grimm story.
Even if everything worked perfectly, it would have been almost impossible for this movie to succeed, because you're comparing it to one of the most beloved films of all time and a truly groundbreaking movie.
In addition to that, there was already an uproar about her being cast as Snow White because she is not Caucasian, she is a Latina, she is half Colombian, and so people were like, why were you cast in the first place? We just had a black Little Mermaid, now we're having a Latina Snow White, and she is literally called Snow White. This doesn't make sense.
If you're a studio, if you're a director, if you're a casting director, you've got to think twice or three times before hiring her. Listen,
chasing applause instead of telling a story. The next Snow White, if there is one, will be watched like a hawk. Whether it's Jenna Ortega or another fresh face, she'll be stepping into a role already haunted by the ghosts of controversy, caution, and corporate missteps. Because now, we all know, it wasn't a poisoned apple that killed Snow White. It was the people trying to rewrite the story before even understanding why we loved it in the first place. So here's the final question. Can Disney ever win back the kingdom it lost? Or has the magic finally tragically run out?